All right, so we're going to start our second half on Chapter 5, which is, let me see, configuring vSpar distributive switches. And we're going to start right here in creating and configuring removing virtual adapters. I'm going to make that a little bit larger. Uh, and so we're going to start with this idea of creating a virtual adapter. And it used to be before vSpar 5.0, you would have to have a separate console line to be able to make some basic changes or manage your switch, if you will. And since the introduction of vSpars 5 and later editions, so more updated editions, you no longer have to do that. So when you would create a virtual adapter, you'd probably do it to interact with the VMware kernel. And that would be the EXI host, ESXi host. I always have trouble with that. And you do it for 6 basic reasons. You do it because you wanted to configure IP storage or management of your switch, vMotion, moving one VMware to another host, vSAN, vSpar replication, FT logging, those types of things. And so basically managing of your device. What we're going to do today is we're going to go ahead and install an adapter and then remove it, just following this activity, talking it through as we go along. And so we're going to go to our environment. We already went into this environment. So I've already entered the environment and logged onto our Linux box and went ahead and logged into our vCenter client. And as you can remember, you just go down and you start a web browser into that. So we're going to go ahead and start from there. In vCenter, let me just scroll up so you can see where I'm at. In vCenter, we're going to go to Home, and then from there, Host and Clusters. We could have also just gone to this panel over here and went right to it as well. We're going to be in the Management tab, and from there, we're going to be in the Networking area, like we've been almost this whole entire chapter. This is really where we've lived. From here, we're going to say, hey, I want to add a host adapter. Now, lately we've been, last time we did a physical adapter, you could create a virtual port group for a standard switch. Well, we're not working with standard switches. We're going to leave it on a VMware kernel adapter. And so we're going to go from there. Just one second. I'm going to pause just one moment just to move things around. Okay, sorry, I had to move things around. We're going to leave it on VMware kernel adapter. I'm going to have to move that a little bit higher. There we go. And hit Next. From here, we're going to select what we want. And here, unfortunately, I'm only seeing the standard switches. So that's a little bit odd. It may be that. Let me look to see why. Alright, so basically what happened was in one of our previous labs, when we created the distributive switch, so over here, you created the distributive switch, we added a host, but then later on in another lab that tells you to delete that host, well, I left that host deleted, and so of course we couldn't, and it was this host over here in case you're wondering. And so since I had deleted that host, or not deleted, removed the host, when we went to do this lab, of course it's not going to show anything. So I went ahead and added that real quick so you know what just happened. Okay, so let's go back over here and let's start over. So we're in our virtual switches, we're in networking, I should say, management, and then networking again. We're looking at virtual switches over here, and I'm going to say add. Okay, so we're going to add this. It's going to be a VMware kernel network adapter. I'm going to hit Next. And here's where we get to select what port group we want. This is the port group that we created, so we're going to go ahead and put in that port group. I'm going to say OK. Okay, and then from here, we're just going to hit Next. Although we could say, okay, here is select an existing network, which we did, select a standard switch if we wanted to, or a new switch. We're going to use an existing network. So I'm going to hit Next again. Here we're going to tell the reasons why. Remember we said there were 6 basic reasons. Well, these are those 6 ones. So maybe I want to do this for vSpar replication. okay, traffic, and virtual SAN traffic, and maybe vMotion, and fault tolerance logging. One second. Sorry, the headset was pulling my hair. And so you just decide the reasons why you're doing this. I'm going to go ahead and say next. Do I want to give it a static IP, or do I want to just have it obtain it automatically? I'm just going to have it obtain it automatically, but if I didn't choose that, I'd have to come in here and give it an IP address for that adapter. Okay. And so over here you're going to see a summary of what you did. So in this step we selected the connection type. I'm just going to go back to it so we can see it. Okay, it's a VMware kernel talking really for management, really. It's not for, if it was a physical one, it'd be for connection to the outside world. This would be a port group for a standard switch. Over here we decide, well, what port group am I going to choose? And we chose the test dev port group. Over here it was, why do we want to choose it? Now it looks like I'm going to have to redo these things as so let me come back over and say vMotion. You got to choose something. vMotion, fault tolerance, management, traffic. It doesn't really matter. Okay, I'm going to hit next. I'm going to just say, hey, for this, it's just going to accept DHCP to determine that. And then now we're ready. So I'm going to finish. And now you should see, it's kind of hard to see because the window's so small in this case. It's going to re-render it. And you can see, let's see if I can make that any bigger. It's kind of frustrating. I can't really do much. Let's get rid of this pane here. Okay, that gives us a little bit more to work with. There we go. And so we can see test dev has a VMware kernel port, one port for that, 0 virtual machines connected to it at this point. And over here we have our uplinks with a physical, one physical port connected to those uplinks. On this uplink, I should say, uplink 1 is connected to that. So that concludes this, not this lecture, but this activity. What we're going to do next is we're going to remove it. And so we're going to talk about how to do that. Please do not forget, if you have any questions or anything like that, let me know. Okay, so let's move on to the next activity. And so the idea here, before you would remove it, let's play with it a little bit and look to see how, if we want to reconfigure it or if there are changes we want to make. Okay, so again, we're going to stay in host and clusters. The easiest way, actually I'm not in host clusters, I'm in networking. I'm going to go to host and clusters. Okay, and from here you can still see that we have that nice rendering of this, nice picture. I'll say that makes things a lot easier in a virtual environment. Since things are so abstract, you can kind of get distracting. You really don't know how things are connected, and it's nice to have that picture there. Now what we're going to do is we're going to select VMware kernel adapters. We're going to select the one that we want to make changes to or to configure. Okay, and so we're going to highlight that one. It's going to be our VMK2 port group test dev. And it'll be on our distributive switch 1. The pencil mark over here is where you're going to go to edit settings. Okay, and this window should look familiar. So let's say, hey, we decided we wanted to get rid of vMotion out of this one, and say we want traffic, management traffic, and maybe some fault tolerance logging instead. And so this is where we can actually make that change. So you're not locked into the purposes that you said before. You can always make modifications. From here I'm going to tell it to be okay. However, if I wanted to, I could make changes to these other settings. Maybe I've decided to statically give it an IP address. Here you can kind of see, it's kind of grayed out, but you can kind of see we have that Microsoft 169 address, but we could change that. We can analyze the impact of what we had just chosen to do. I'm going to go back to where we were. I'm going to hit OK. But again, it's not a bad idea to come down through here and just get to know the different things that you can set. You can't just, we're not just talking about the port properties of what this thing will do when we're done. We're also talking about, hey, you can set MTUs, you can set the IP address again if you've made a mistake there. Especially because you see the default gateway is this, and yet I have an IP address of 169, which is really kind of strange. But again, analyzing the impact of your changes is important. But the moment you hit OK, it'll get you out of here. So it's not something where you go through this step, this step, this step, and this step. It doesn't bring you through every option on the left-hand pane of this window like a lot of the other windows do. It simply says which one you want to make a change to, and I'll honor that change when you say OK. And so we do. And so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to delete what we've just done. So it's going to go ahead and re-render and look to see make those changes. Now, when deleting this kernel adapter, it's actually fairly easy. You just select the one that you want to delete, and you're going to hit on Remove Selected Network Adapter. Now, what's nice, though, is it's going to come up and say removing this VMware kernel adapter makes several blah, blah, blah. It's just checking to see, hey, are you sure you want to do this? Do you want me to run a check to make sure it's okay? And I'd recommend hitting Analyze the Impact. You could just say, okay, if you know what you're doing, you're comfortable. But here we're going to analyze it. There's no impact, so there's no problem getting rid of it. So I'm going to go ahead and say OK, and you'll see that disappear in just a moment. Okay, and there we go. It's gone. All right, so what we're going to start talking about now is migrating virtual adapters from one to the next switch. The idea here is if you have standard switches and you have a distributive switch, most likely you're wanting to remove everything off the standard switches and put them on the distributive switch. Otherwise, why do you have the distributive switch? And so that's the purpose here, is to remove them from the standard switches onto your distributive switch. To do this, we're going to come right back here, but just so we don't forget where we're at, let's just bring us back to home. Okay, I'm going to go to Hosts and Clusters. I'm going to select Virtual Switches. From here, I'm going to click on this switch that I want to retain, the one that I want everything moved to. Okay, and so I'm going to click on the distributive switch. If we had it on one of the standard switches, you can see that our picture changes, but also our options up here will be different. They may not even look different, but they will be different. So I'm going to click on the distributive switch. I'm just going to hover over this one over here, if I can. And it says Manage the Physical Network Adapter. That's not the one I want, so let's go over here. This one says Migrate Physical or Virtual Network Adapters to this distributive switch. That's the one we want. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that. And from here, I have to ask myself, well, what do I want migrated? Okay, so here's a nice rendering. It's a sample. And I'm going to unclick the physical adapters. I'm going to leave Manage VMware Kernel Adapters. That's the one we're after at this point. I'm going to hit Next. So I have to move the window up a little bit. Okay. Okay. And so we're going to hit Next like we just did. And right here it's kind of funny. It says Do Not Migrate. We are going to migrate it. So I'm going to go ahead and select that. I'm going to say Assign this port. But again, it's looking at these two switches and saying, well, which VMware VM kernel adapters does it have? They both have one. And I've decided, okay, I'm going to take that one. I'm going to assign it to this port group on my distributive switch. Let me go back. So I'm saying I'm going to take this management VMware kernel adapter, and I'm going to assign it to my distributive switch. And I'm going to put it in, let's say, the test dev port group. And just for fun, let's move the other one. Let's take this switch and removes it as well. This one is for the fault tolerance, and I'm going to assign this one. Let's say if I assign this one to the other distributive port group on the distributive switch. Okay, so I've reassigned it. I'm going to hit Next. It's saying what's the impact. There is no impact. I love the fact that it analyzes the impact. That's really a useful tool. It saves you a lot, particularly in a production environment. I'm going to say OK or Next. Ready to complete, and we should be finished. So at this point, it has applied those changes, and these switches no longer will have those uplinks on them for your VMware kernel. Our next topic is going to be migrating. Sorry, I lost the train of my thought. Virtual machines or virtual port groups from one to the next. The analogy that the book uses is actually pretty good. It talks about how if you are working in the production environment and you see that you have some old switches out there, their functionality is old, they just don't have the power you want, maybe they're noisy, and you just happen to be able to buy new switches, and so what you've decided to do is move everyone off of the old switches on the new ones. Well, it's the same idea, except you don't lose all that configuring that you did. So on a port group, one of the purposes of a port group is you get so much more functionality out of a port. It might, maybe it's the purposes or the policies that you've put on those port groups, and so you've done it for multiple ports, but you define them as a port group, and so they all inherit those characteristics. And so what we want to do is we don't want to recreate that. We just want to migrate it from one device to the next, or from one standard switch to a distributive switch, and that's what we're going to do. And vSpar makes it really easy. Okay, now, in order to do this, we actually have to have a host, and so we don't have a host. We're going to have to create that. So, it's a pretty simple thing to do. We're going to come in here. We're still in host and clusters. I'm just going to right-click the ESXi host, and I'm going to say New Virtual Machine. I'm just going to do, we don't have any in the library, so we're just going to say New Virtual Machine, and we're just going to kind of select a lot of dummy information. Okay, so select the type. Apparently that doesn't matter, so I'm just going to say create a new virtual machine. We're going to call this, let's just call this VM host. That's about as simple as we can make it, but it should make sense. Let's make the M also capitalized. Okay, we're going to leave it in the training cluster. Hit next. We're going to leave it in that host. From here, we're going to decide, well, where is the data store? The data store is, where's the actual thing exist in storage? We're going to leave it in here. Okay. Hit next again. Excuse me. Sorry about that. We're going to say the most the earliest, not the earliest, but the oldest version of, or the best, the most recent version of ESXi, which is 6.0, which is what we have. From here, we're just going to tell it's a Windows operating system. Hit next. This is going to ask, what kind of hardware do we want to give it? Okay, so one CPU. We're giving it way too much storage simply because we don't have that much storage. So we're going to say 8 gigs, or I'm going to bring it down to 4. We're going to be deleting this pretty soon. But here is your hardware summary. I'm going to hit next again. And from here, we're going to hit finish. Okay, so it will appear right there. So now we're ready to start the lab. Now, one thing I do have to say about this, I'm going to go ahead and select it. If we were to power this on, there would be no operating system. All we've done is we've set aside hardware. We've said, here's the hardware that it's allowed to have. So it's not like you get a computer in the mail, or you're building your own computer, and you have not installed an operating system. That's exactly what's happened here, except in the virtual world. And so if we were to power this thing on, it wouldn't. Notice once you right-click it, you could power it on, but it would immediately tell us, hey, there's nothing to power on to. There's no operating system. We're going to go to Edit Sources, not Edit Sources, I'm sorry, Edit Settings. Okay, so remember, we're going to migrate this from one to the next. Okay, so, and let's see, under Network Adapter, we're going to choose VM Network, which we already have. So it actually doesn't seem like there's a lot of changes that we need to make. I could put it on the port group over here. That would move it to, that would put it in the distributive switches port group. So we could change this to a different port group, or we could put it in just the VM network. I'm keeping the VM network, but this is where you could migrate from one port group to the next. And it doesn't really matter, so I'm just going to move it into the port group. I don't want it in there. So these two port groups are actually for management, or the VMware kernel. Let's say we wanted to move to another distributive switch. Okay, you can see we have an error there. Enter a valid ID. It's because we messed with that switch. Put it back in the VMware networking. Make sure that this is checkboxed. But that's how you'd move that VMware host to another port group. Okay. And VMware networking is actually where we want it to be. Okay, hit OK. And so now that has been successfully moved to where we want it. Now that works pretty well for an individual host, and if you want to use it, just migrate an individual host from one group to the next, or from one distributive switch to the next, that works great. But what if you want to move a lot of them at once? That's kind of what we're going to look at doing now, is moving a whole lot of virtual machines from one group to the next. To this end, we're going to go to the networking section. So we're going to get out of host and clusters. I'm going to hit networking. And from here, I'm going to right-click our distributive switch, and I'm going to choose migrate VM to another network. Now we don't have a lot of VMs, so this may not seem as neat as it really is. This window is basically asking where are the virtual machines that you want to migrate. So if they're already part of a network, we'd leave it there and we'd grab them from here. If they aren't part of a network, we'd come over here and select them from that point. So there might be some virtual machines that weren't part of a network. If there's a destination network we want to send them to, this is also where we'd go. And so we're going to kind of go with that idea. So these two options are one or the other. This one is where do you want to place them. So where's the source? Where's the destination? If the VMware already has, or the VMware host already has a network, then this is the option. If it is not networked to any network, this is the option we'd choose. We know that it is part of the network, so I'm going to say browse. And you can remember, these are the options we had earlier. We're going to say VM network. It's not going to be part of any of those two port groups. Okay, and then we're going to say, well, where do we want it to end up? Okay, and so I'm going to ask myself, where do I want it to end up? We're just going to put it in a port group. Really, I should have created another network here, but that's okay. And so we're going to move it from VM network, and we're going to move it into the port group. If we tried to link it to the same network, it would give us an error. So for example, if I did this instead, I hit next, it will say you're trying to move the host from one network to the same network. That doesn't work. So we have to choose a different network. And again, I'm just going to choose this port group here. We haven't really done much with that port group anyway. Then I'm going to hit next. Here you'd see a whole list of hosts if we had a bunch of them. So let's say we had several hundred. I just hit all virtual machines if I wanted to. Or maybe I just choose one at a time, just click on them. I'm just going to choose this host that we just created. You'll see that its network adapter has been clicked, checkboxed as well, and hit next. This is just confirming it, saying, okay, here is where it was, here's where you're adding it to. It's going to be one virtual machine, it could be several hundred. Okay, and the adapters that you're migrating is just one as well. You might have more than one adapter. From here you hit finish. And there you go. You have now reassigned it to a different network. And so the last two activities that we've done, it does the same exact thing. It's just one you can do, the one we did previously, which was the last activity, I believe 513. You moved one at a time, whereas this one you can do several at a time. So our next topic of what we're going to do is we're going to look at, let's try to get a little bit more out of our physical adapters. So let's say we have multiple physical adapters, and what we want to do is combine their bandwidth. But on the VM side, on our end, we want to manage it as if it's one physical or one adapter. Okay, so one logical adapter on the virtual machine side. And so that's what we're going to do. To do this, we're going to create what's called a link aggregation group, or LAGS. Okay, and that's going to be we're going to refer to that now as instead of all those physical uplinks. Okay, so or all the uplinks that we're connected to. Now we only have one physical adapter, so it's going to take some imagination in this discussion, but hopefully it'll make sense as we go on. We're going to be in the networking. We're actually where we need to be. I'm going to go ahead and move us to home. It's been a while since we've been there, just so we can kind of have that base. And then I'm going to go to networking. From here, we're going to go to manage, and we're going to go to, let's see, we're on a distributive switch, manage. Go to manage, and we're going to be on settings. I'm so used to going to the working with the other stuff, the adapters. We're going to go to LACP, and this is where we're going to create that lag. Okay, and then we're just going to hit the plus symbol. We're going to be in keeping with the book, so I'm going to replace it with lag with the uppercase. Lag 1. Number of ports, we could increase the number of ports. I'm going to leave it at 2. Passive mode or active mode, we're going to leave it at passive. Load balancing mode. So load balancing mode, okay, do I want it for a VLAN, source IP, ID, source destination, TCP, or I just want everything. And that's basically everything. Okay. From here, I'm just going to hit OK. So now that we've created it, what we're going to do is we're going to have to assign it. And sometimes it takes a while for it to appear. You can see over here that it's appeared now. Lag, 2 ports, passive, and if we wanted to, we can click on there and we can actually delete it or even edit it. So maybe we made a mistake and we decided, hey, we wanted you to be active instead of passive. We could do that as well. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to look at our port groups, our distributed port groups, and we're going to decide, well, which one of these do we want to assign the lag? And again, it is to allow us to have multiple physical links act as one. So I'm going to just right-click over here on our distributed port group. It's our test dev, the one we've been creating. I'm going to hit Edit Settings. And there are a lot of different settings we can edit, but we're going to really just look over here on the teaming failover. Now, and I'm going to assign, and we actually have 2 lags, assign this lag to the uplinks, the ones that I want to participate in this. And so I'm going to grab this lag and I'm going to move it up into the standby uplink. So we have active, unused, standby. And so we're going to move it into standby. And then we're going to hit OK. Okay, blah, blah, blah. We're just going to blow through this. Okay, I'm just going to confirm our change. It's still thinking. Okay, edit settings. Just so you can see that it's there. Teaming failover. And it's still in standby. That's what we wanted to see. Okay, and now we're going to move to the next step, which we're going to right-click our distributive switch, and we're going to go to Add and Manage Hosts. We're going to click on Manage Host Networks. Just over here, networking, I guess I should say. Let me move that window up. And we're going to click on Next. From here, we're going to say Attach a Host. We only have 1 host, so we'll go ahead and attach that one. So we'll hit OK. And then we're going to hit Next. We're going to select Manage Physical Adapters. So we're going to get rid of the Manage VMware kernel adapters. And we're going to click on Next as well. Okay. Okay, so in here we're going to assign these physical adapters to the lag. Okay, so I'm going to just click on this one real quick and assign that. Now we had 2 lag ports, so we're going to assign it here. Now it's 1 lag, but since I only have 2 ports, I can only attach 2 physical adapters to it. If you remember when we first created that lag, that's what that did. So I'm going to say OK, and maybe I want this one as well, so I'm going to assign that to the lag as well. Okay, and so now you can see assigned, reassigned. It's going to be assigned to the lag. And I'm going to hit Next, and then I'm going to hit Finish. Okay, it's going to give, or Next again. It's going to tell me what it's done, and it says 2 physical adapters. Then I'm going to hit Finish. Now, if you remember, when we created the lag, we had it in the standby mode. Well, it's still in standby, and so what we need to do is we need to remove it from the standby mode. So we're going to right-click that port group under the distributive switch. We're going to say Settings. We're going to go to Teaming and Failover. I'm going to highlight the lag, and I'm going to move it up. And we're going to move it up so it's now in the, and I don't know why I'm moving it all the way up, but we're going to move it into these active uplinks. And I'm going to remove the other uplinks and move them down to unused. And unfortunately, I gave myself 8, so it's just more of us for us to do. Now you have to make sure that you're not moving up links that are associated with other. Well, one second, let me finish and then I'll talk. So we're just slowly moving these out. And if this were my environment, I'd make sure these are all numbered properly. But if any of these uplinks are connected to a physical port that is not represented here in the lag, you don't want to move it out of active. So if that's the case, you might want to put that back up there. But in this case, it's not. They're not assigned to it, so we're fine. So I'm going to move it back down. And again, if this were a production environment, I'd make that look nice because I'm obsessive compulsive. And we hit OK, and now what we've done is we've successfully configured that for teaming. So now they can work together. So that's really it. That was a little bit longer than I wanted it to be. I hope it makes sense. One of the purposes of the lecture is not to necessarily just go through the labs with you. I'm hoping that answers questions. Sometimes the labs don't work out. Maybe we need to do a little bit more background. For example, I needed to create a host for one of the labs, or one of the activities, I should say. But also it's to have someone just walk you through it, talk about the chapter, and hopefully it makes a little bit more sense. If it doesn't, talk to fellow classmates, email me, let me know what I can do to help. Okay, and so that will conclude for Chapter 5, and we'll be looking forward to hearing from you. So let me know if there's anything or any questions that you have.